For Josiah, 10 years old, adjustment must not have been easy. He had to learn the French and Iroquois language, accept the rituals and practices of the Catholic religion, and integrate himself fast to his new way of life. We don't exactly know how things went for him, but we have testimony of other boys of his age taken captive at Deerfield with him. Stephen Williams, 10 years old, told that the English boys taken at the Abenaki Reserve of Odanak near Sorel laughed at him in front of the Indians and make believe they did not knew English anymore, but they spoke English with him when they were alone together. Tuatuguash and Shuntakwani were not adopted by the family in which they were assigned. They both remain war captives capable of being sold or may be needed for prisoner exchange or they could get their freedom for peace talks. In everyday life, they became household slaves. Since 1650, owning slaves were for Indians a sign of riches and prestige. The more, the merrier. Slaves were given the most boring chores. Little Tuatuguash was assigned to get the water every day at the river. Shuntakwani him must have been sent to the fields. Here we have to understand that in the Iroquoian society, working in the fields is woman's work. The English captives were liked because they accepted to work in the fields. By the same token, those people were discredited, seen as inferior, and banned from the hunters. When they were with a hunting party, they were given woman's work, like carrying the different package or bringing the game back to the village. For young Shantakwani, life must have been very hard. In the Iroquois society, assimilation was very important. The captives had to integrate themselves completely and as soon as possible, otherwise they would be subject to mockery, insult, and laughed at. Integration with the drastically unique Iroquois culture was daunting for a 12-year-old of English descent. Torn, stranded, and deprived of his true identity, he was forced to mature with the confine of his Josiah Rising, Inyas Rezen, and Shuantakwani personalities. 1713. France and England signed the Utrecht Treaty, which ends their wars. It is now almost 10 years that Shantakwani and Totoguash are captives. She is now 13 years old and him 19. They are now integrated in the hybrid mission of Fort Lorette. They were educated by the Sulpician priests and the Sisters of La Congregation Notre Dame. They now speak French, but they also speak fluently Iroquois and are now assimilated to the Iroquois way of life. Now that the war is over between the French and the English, means that the captives will be able to go back home. John Nims, Abigail's half-brother, comes to New France to offer a ransom for his sister. John was also a captive. At the age of 25, he was taken prisoner along with his half-brother Zebediah Williams, who was 29 years old. Both were kidnapped while working in the fields. It was in October 1703, only a few months before the Deerfield Massacre. Both were brought to Montreal and had a very hard and severe captivity. Zebediah died in prison after 2 years, but John managed to escape with two other prisoners who were also taken on that raid. After 25 days of walking with hardly no food and no guide to help them, they were almost dead when they reached Deerfield. Now 35 years old and married to his adopted sister, Elizabeth Hull, Elizabeth was also taken captive in 1704, but was ransomed the next year. Finally, John left Deerfield, walked all 230 miles or 340 kilometers to Montreal to offer a ransom for his young sister, Abigail, but she refuses to go back home.
I'd rather be a poor captive among the Catholics than to become a rich heiress among the Protestants.
John Nims returns back to Deerfield empty handed. Back in Montreal, the Sulpician priests, moved by Abigail's magnificent fate revelation, decided to intervene. They negotiate with her master and gets her liberated. They also negotiate the release of Josiah Rising Shuntakwani that nobody in Deerfield, Massachusetts or Suffield, Connecticut seems to be interested in. In 1715, Abigail Elizabeth Tuatugwash is 15. She is now free and able to get married. Josiah Inyas Shuntakwani is 21. Elizabeth and Inyas both came from Deerfield. They were both taken in the same raid. They decided to get married. The ceremony takes place on July 29, 1715, in the chapel of Folaret at Le Sceau au Récollet in Montreal. The new couple could have been able to establish themselves on a land in Montreal, like other captives who decided to stay in New France. Let's take, for instance, Mathias Farnsworth, who the Sulpician priest changed his name to Fanif. Matthias was taken captive in Groton, Massachusetts in August 1704. He finally decided to start a farm in Rivière-des-Prairies in the northeast of Montreal. But Ignace and Elizabeth decided to stay at the mission with the priests and the Indians with which they were raised. We have very few information on the first years of their marriage. Due to this fact, we think that the Sulpician priests destroyed documents because a lot of French married to Indians. At that time, New France became métis, both genetically and culturally. In 1850, the Canadian government, with its new politics of trying to eliminate and completely assimilate both Métis and Indian to the European culture. For the French Canadians to keep their civil rights, the clergy thought it would be best to erase all traces of crossbreeding, and the historians invented purely European origins. It seems impossible to find the original document of the marriage of Ignace and Elizabeth, or the baptism of their children born at Le Sceau au Récollet. In some books of genealogy, it is written that their daughter Catherine would have been born on the 12th of May 1714, more than a year before the marriage of Ignace and Elizabeth. It is impossible to find the original document to confirm this date. For their son Simon, we found a birth certificate that indicates that the child was the son of Ignace Shuntakwani and his legal wife, Elizabeth Tuatugwash. On the other hand, we can read in the book La Paroisse de Champlain, or Champlain's Parish, written by Father Cloutier, that Simon had the skin brown like an Indian.